Welcome. I am very excited to be here. My name is Mary Beth Gassman, and I am a professor at Rutgers University. I am also the executive director of the Proctor Institute for Leadership, Equity, and Justice and the Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions. And we are excited to sponsor this webinar today. It is also sponsored by the Mellon Foundation and is part of a larger program that we offer called Hispanic Serving Institutions Pathways to the Professoriate Program. And we love to sponsor talks that are humanities focused. And we're very excited today to be having a wonderful speaker David Medeiros, who is Associate Professor of Linguistics at California State University, Northridge. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. We have Natalie Passoff, who's managing tech today. We want you to know that you can put any of your questions during the talk in the Q&A. And at the end of the talk, we will ask the questions. We hope you will have lots and lots of questions. The name of the talk today is Universality and Difference Across Imperative Constructions in Language. And I want to say, welcome, David. I am really excited to learn from you today.
Hi, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And for everyone who's in attendance today. So I'll get started here and take questions at the end. Yeah, I have a lot to talk about today, so I'll get started right now. But thank you all for the introduction and for attending. So today I'm going to talk about imperative constructions. And my goal for today is to show that the category that we call imperative varies by language, both in its form or syntax and also its meaning. I'm going to argue that the variation that we see across languages actually has within language explanation. So when we see differences, we're seeing correlated differences within any given language. And the point of this is that imperative is a useful category for cross-linguistic analysis. All right, so let me sort of frame what I mean by this and why that's important. So in the biggest picture here, what we can see is that the question is about universal linguistic categories. So we know, going back a long way, that there's only an arbitrary connection between words / forms and their meanings, right? So some sort of meaning, like cat, the domestic house cat, right? That has a particular meaning. But the form that expresses that meaning is random. We can't predict it given a particular language. Basically, the word for cat varies across languages, right? And it's unpredictable. But can we take a grammatical form and generalize across languages, right? So if you've ever learned a foreign language, maybe learned about, this is the passive in, say, Spanish or in German or whatever. Does a grammatical category like passive, verb, progressive, or whatever it might be, does that kind of category have a generalizable meaning across languages that's universal? Right, so that's the question. And let's see here. So we might ask ourselves, are there universal units of grammatical materials or function in language? So there are two ways to look at this. One is expressed by Martin Hasselmatt here on the slide, who says that grammatical categories, things like passive or present tense or whatever, are not cross-linguistic entities, either universally available or universally instantiated. Now, he's definitely right that grammatical categories are not universally instantiated, right? So many languages, for example, maybe not many, some languages, let's say, in their first person pronouns that are plural, so we in English, some languages like, say, Polynesian languages, their first person pronouns in the plural have two forms. One is inclusive, that is to say we, you and me, and the other is exclusive, that's to say we, but not you, right? And those are two different words actually in the pronoun system. Now English doesn't have that. So we know that grammatical categories are not universal across languages. Some languages have a plural, some don't, etc. But when we do think about something like the plural, for example, or inclusivity in pronouns, is that concept can we even compare across languages? So the other view here is expressed by Noam Chomsky, who says that constraints on learnability, by which he means essentially the fact that we're all humans, does that impose strict conditions on the kinds of units that can be attributed to a natural language and their manner of arrangement and interconnection? So basically, we have these grammatical formatives. When we do see them in a language, are they, can we even talk about them as in sort of a universal way? More generally, we could ask ourselves, are languages closed systems? Sure, we can translate from, say, English to Spanish, but is English really its own system that really has no direct connection to, say, another language like, say, Spanish? Can we legitimately compare across languages these sort of grammatical concepts, like, say, present or past tense or progressive or whatever it might be? In other words, are languages able to vary without clearly defined limits? Or are languages constrained by a rich, powerful, and innate universal grammar? So those are two ways to look at it, right? So languages are closed systems, they're entities unto themselves, they can vary infinitely, or is the sort of hypothesis base for languages constrained? Yes, languages differ quite a bit, but is there sort of regularity with that variation? All right, so with that in mind, my plan for today is to talk about one such category, imperative. If you've studied foreign languages, I'm sure you've seen this term, but the question is, does this term apply in sort of a universal way across languages, or is imperative in language X really maybe, you know, it's kind of similar, but it's just really not the same thing as in language Y? Or can we have a unified notion of this concept? I'm going to present some problematic cases in English, and then show some counterexamples to consensus views in two types of languages. And I'm going to show basically that what we think of when we think of imperative is quite diverse, more than you might think actually, but that where we do see this diversity, we do see within language explanation, such that the concept imperative actually is a universal, right? So I'm going to take sort of the more Chomskyan viewpoint here, that languages are not completely closed systems and that we can compare categories across languages. All right, but before I do this, I have to define what an imperative is, of course. So let's take a first pass. We can define an imperative, or really most things in language, at this sort of level of construction in one of two ways. We can talk about the semantics of their pragmatics, basically what they mean and how they're used. That's the semantic and the pragmatic side. And then we can also look at the morphosyntactic level, which is their sort of form, right? Like how is the actual word pronounced, or what is the actual handshake for this category? And then their sort of structure within a sentence, essentially. So that's the morphology and the syntax. And let me just say that defining things in terms of their meaning might seem like it would be the easy way to go, but meaning is very complicated. So I'm actually going to start with the morphosyntax and see if we can find anything about imperatives that we can sort of hold on to. So one thing we could say about an imperative is that it's a verb often with a specific form. Now, in English, this is not super helpful because usually the imperative looks just like an infinitive, or like the dictionary entry for a verb. But we see this with be. So if we had a statement, you are on time, or a question, are you on time? We get the verb here, are, A-R-E, right? So we get this particular form of the verb, be, in an imperative, right? And there's no modal here, like must in this case, which we would not consider to be an imperative, because there we have this what's called a modal verb. If it was a complete non-imperative or command, it would be are, A-R-E, right? So we have this specific form. It often requires, or at least allows, a specific sentence structure. Now, English is not a great example of this, but occasionally we'll see this, like in a negated imperative, don't you be late, right? So that's sort of like what a parent might say to a child or something with the you there, don't you be late. Usually this type of sentence structure with the verb or the do at the beginning, that's typically associated with a question. And it's often the case that imperatives and question forms are similar in languages, and we can see that here. The other thing that's very important in this example is the parentheses. That's very key. You got to focus on that. When you see the parentheses around a word, that indicates that it's optional. So this is another sort of interesting part of imperatives in English, that the subject does not need to be expressed, which is typically the case in English. Not always, but typically. I mean, not in imperatives, for example. So you could just say, don't be late, and that's perfectly fine. And so it also does allow this unexpressed subject. All right. I'm going to skip the rest of the slide just for sake of time. Imperatives in many languages, most languages probably, are also second person. Now, quick aside, what is person? So person is the linguistic term to describe the form and how it varies that maps onto sort of conversational participant, essentially. So first person is always the speaker or the signer, right? So we can see that on the slide. I is the first person singular and we is the first person plural. And the I or the we is always referring to the speaker or the signer. And then the second person is the addressee or the addressees, right? So you in the singular, you can also be plural, y'all, you guys, whatever it might be in your dialect, yins, whatever it is, that's going to be second person singular or plural, the addressees. And so we can see that in an actual, real world conversation, the person that is the first person and the person that is the second person is going to switch, right? So when you're the one, say, signing, you're the first person, but when you're the one watching, you're the second person, right? And so on and so forth. We also have third person here, which is not super important for this talk, although I'm going to mention it later. If someone is not a speaker or signer and they're not an addressee, then that's the third person. That's basically everybody else, right? So that we might talk about. We're talking about them, not to them, essentially. That's third person there. Okay, so we can see this in English, that imperatives are second person in the following way. If I had said something like non-imperative, Watson should raise your hand. Watson here, whoever Watson is not the owner of the hand, right? So this would be like, someone wins the boxing match and then Watson needs to go over and raise that person's hand. Watson should raise your hand, right? Like physically lift it up. But in the imperative form here, the second example, if I said, Watson, you raise your hand right now, right? Now, Watson is the owner of the hand, right? Watson and the hand owner are the same person, right? So Watson, if he wants to comply here, will raise his own hand, right? So now let's take a look at the word like everyone. Now, everyone is inherently a third person. So if I said something like non-imperative, everyone likes your teacher, that means, some group of people, everyone, likes some particular person's teacher, such that everyone and they're different people, all right? But if we look at the imperative form and say, everyone raise your hand, imagine a teacher walks into a room, they look at their students, everyone raise your hand, right? What they're trying to do is to get every individual addressee to raise that individual person's own hand, right? So this is quite curious, actually, because everyone is generally a third person form, but it takes on these second person properties such that it can co-refer or antecede this your possessive pronoun here only in these imperative constructions, right? Something that was discussed extensively by Zanatini here. So that's a really interesting thing that indicates that imperatives are sort of imperatives have the second person property, even for things that look like they should be third person. I'm going to skip that slide and this one for sake of time here. Let's now go to the meaning side of things. So if you've taken a foreign language, probably you learn that imperatives are commands like don't go, be on time, check your work one more time. And of course, imperatives can be these things, and we see that here. Also note that imperatives as commands are subject, just like almost anything in language, to what we call pragmatic inferencing. So like sarcasm is a type of pragmatic inferencing. So if you said to somebody, fine, be that way, right? it's still a command, but then it's pragmatically inferenced to indicate that it's sort of like, I hate that you're doing this thing, so don't do it really. So that's a typical sort of thing in language here, which imperatives as commands can do, of course, as well. But command is really too narrow for imperatives. So imperatives can be used in many sort of non-direct command ways, like permission. I'm not hot, but if you're hot, feel free to open the window. Or if you're hot, open the window in the imperative, right? Like, let's say I'm at a conference and I'm talking to somebody, I'm never going to see them again ever in my life. They tell me they want to visit Los Angeles, so I say, hey, if you want to get to LA, try flying into Burbank. I don't really care if they do that or not. I'm just saying, hey, that's a good way to go. We could even use an imperative to establish some sort of common ground, maybe even one you don't agree with. Okay, so, okay, assume she's right. If that's true, then, right? So that assume is an imperative. We can even use it as a warning, again, with the pragmatic inferencing property. You think that's a good idea? Okay, try it, right? To mean, don't try it, essentially. Command is also too broad, though. So many things can be commands. This sort of conditional reading on these indicative non-imperative verbs, one more mistake and you're gone. You must be on time, which has this must, which we call a modal verb here. An infinitive can be in a command. Teacher says, this book is to be read by next week. We can have a rhetorical question. Do you think that's a good idea? And then, maybe most sort of idiomatically in English, have to. You have to go now, right? That's a typical type of command. And notice that in this have to construction, the you is not optional. So there's a little asterisk next to the parentheses, which says you cannot have optionality here. The subject is required. All right. So we can see that the meaning is actually pretty difficult. One interesting part about imperatives, though, in their meaning, is their lack of what's called truth conditions. So there's a long-standing view in linguistics, going back to the 1800s, that if we know the meaning of a sentence, we must know the conditions under which that sentence would be true. So, for example, if I said, it's raining in New Brunswick, it doesn't matter if that sentence is true or false, or even if it's ambiguous because maybe it's misting or something. We can understand the conditions by which we could confirm or deny it, right? So we understand the conditions under which that sentence would be true. And it sounds kind of trivial, but it turns out that it's actually a very powerful model of meaning. So if I said something like, if I won the lottery, I'd cure world hunger, you could then say, no, you wouldn't. You'd spend it all on fancy cars, right? The fact that you can deny this hypothetical sentence means that you know the meaning, right? So how we get to the meaning is super complicated and would take a couple semesters to get to here. But the idea is if you can do that, then you presumably know the meaning of the sentence, if you can confirm or deny it, essentially. And we get this with non-imperatives, right? So you must be on time. No, I don't need to be. You have to read this book. No, I don't. You can't go in there. Yes, I can. But with imperatives, that's a little odd. The hashtag thing indicates that it's not really a natural response, all right? So we're not saying it's ungrammatical, it's just unnatural in the context, all right? So if you said to somebody, be on time, it's pretty weird if they say, be on time. No, I don't have to be. They more naturally might say, actually, I have permission to be late. Read this book. No, I don't, or no, I won't, is a little odd, especially just in isolation. Read this book. No, I don't do it, right? Actually, I'm allowed to skip it, more natural. Don't go in there. Yes, that's true. Instead, you would say, yes, instead you'd say, actually, I can go in there. So if you say something like be on time, what's really weird to say is, no, that's not true. Or yes, that is true. Read this book. No, that's not true. Yes, it is true. It's much more natural to say something like, actually, I'm allowed to skip that book. So the idea here is that you can't really deny the imperative, but rather you can deny what the imperative presupposes, which is a very normal thing in language it's beyond imperatives here. So if someone said to you, hey, did that happen back when John Kerry was president? It's actually now gets very hard to establish the truth conditional meaning of that sentence, since John Kerry never was the president. So you can't really confirm or deny this either. But what you can do is deny the presupposition to say, wait a minute, I'm not going to answer this question. Hey, wait a minute, John Kerry never was the president, right? So there's sort of two different things going on. There's the truth conditional meaning, and then there's the presuppositional meaning, right? And this is actually going to be a little important. I'm going to reference this later on as well. So this is all related then to what's sometimes called the sentence force. So imperatives don't have truth conditions. How do we talk about them? And one way that people have talked about them is via this thing called directive force. So the lack of truth conditions has often been linked to this notion of directive force. So Searle says a directive is an attempt by the speaker to get the hearer to do something. In other words, you can comply or refuse, but you cannot confirm or deny, which basically sounds about right. I'm going to say that's a little too strong because imperatives are not always commands. They're sometimes just very disinterested, as I mentioned earlier. In this other research, which I'm about to get to here in a second, as Rakesh and I said that a directive must convey some sort of instruction. That's really all it is. So it's a little bit weaker than this than Searle's meaning or definition here. But let's say a directive has to convey an instruction. It'll also be important a little bit later on that the force is really a property of sentences. It can only be determined by the main clause. So here we have what looks like a question, what they said, inside a statement. I wonder what they said. And the whole sentence has to be a statement, not a question. How can you believe that Wonka is a criminal? How can you believe is a question. Wonka is a criminal is a statement. But the whole sentence has to be a question because that's where the force is. It's the whole sentence level or the main clause. And again here, be certain that you can answer this problem. You can answer this problem is a statement, but the be certain is a directive. So the whole sentence has to be a directive for that reason. So one consensus view on imperatives that relates to all this, its directive force, which is related to its lack of truth conditions. The consensus view here is that imperatives always have directive force. And evidence for that is that they cannot be embedded in an embedded clause. So the main clause in the sentence is I believe. That's fine on its own, obviously. I believe that blah, 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 blah. But to put an imperative down there is really quite weird. I believe that get the hell out of here. Or in a relative clause. This is a book that read, right? Meaning this is the book that you should or must read. To have that imperative down there is really, really strange. This is a book that read. So you can't, the idea here is you can't embed the imperative because an imperative always has directive force. That's related to its lack of truth conditional meaning. But I'm going to challenge the data here. I'm going to say that in some languages, you actually can embed them. And that will also have to sort of alter this theory of imperatives as well. All right, so where and what is an imperative? All right, I love this meme template, by the way, the condescending Wonka. So what we could say here is that directive force is a property of sentences. And in a lot of literature, imperative has just been equated with directive. Just they're the same thing, essentially. But imperatives do have this cluster of morphosyntactic properties, special verb form, unique conditions on the subject, etc. So we might ask ourselves, where is an imperative? Is it a verb? Is it a sentence? Is it both? Is it something else? Where and what is it exactly? And that's something that's just very confused in the literature. Is an imperative a sentence? Or is it a type of verb with a specific morphology and structure? And the answer, of course, must be defined within an analysis and a theory and be substantiated by some evidence. So that's what I'm going to try to do for the rest of this talk, now that we've established some of these things. So the first thing I want to do is talk about some research by Ezra Keshet and I, where we talked about some strange cases in English that have been noticed for a long time, over 100 years here. We can see this type of construction in this Dick Tracy cartoon, which I think Dick Tracy here needs to be read in the old-timey accent. Texie, you wouldn't drill me or anybody else with that rod, would you? And then she responds, take another step and I'll let you have it right in the kisser, you tin Sherlock. All right, so why does this matter? Let's take a look here. The imperative that she used there is a little strange, and the reason why is because usually an imperative conveys some sort of instruction, take another step. So it'd be very weird then to follow that up. Same speaker now here, to say, so don't take another step. Right? You're not going to say take another step unless you want them to take another step. So it'd be pretty weird to follow up an imperative with, the denial of your request, right? Take another step and I'll shoot is quite different because now you can say, so don't take another step. And then in 3, we go back to having the sort of properties in 1. Take another step and claim your prize. So don't take another step. That the follow-up is weird. So what we could say here is that the imperative in 2 is a little strange. It does not convey a command in the same way as the others. As you can see, it requires this additional material. And for this reason, certain IAD, that is imperative and declarative, conjunctions have been analyzed as special cases where the directive force is missing. We can see that here as well. Christmas is canceled. You can't cancel a holiday. Keep it up, Stanley, and you'll lose New Year's. All right, so again, same type of thing. It's actually a pretty common construction in just colloquial English. And what we can say here is that one way to look at this is to talk about imperatives, IAD constructions as separable or inseparable. So a standalone imperative, take another step, that directs the addressee to perform some sort of action that the speaker or signer at least allows, if not recommends or commands. Some IAD constructions are the same. The first clause can stand alone. Take another step and I'll reward you. Yes, take another step. You can just repeat that first clause, no problem. The unexpected ones require this additional clause. They're inseparable. Take another step and I'll shoot. Yes, take another step. The follow-up is weird, as indicated by the hashtag here. So we can't just take that first clause and repeat it. Something else is going on. These are superficially ambiguous in most cases. There actually are some syntactic differences, but we don't often see them. I won't get into those now because for sake of time, but we can see this example, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, right? So sort of common proverb or something. But this is actually ambiguous here. Do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life because the crap you like doing and hiring, right? So when the grumpy old man here says it, it's actually inseparable, right? He does not mean do what you love, rather, go into something that is lucrative. If the positive, optimistic life coach says it, do what you love, then it is separable, right? So because the life coach actually sort of means it, right? And in many real world cases, only the context can disambiguate here. Now, previous accounts of this construction, the weird ones, the inseparable ones, remove the directive force, and that equates them essentially with their corresponding declarative and declarative, right? Because then they're basically saying, what's an imperative without directive force? It must be just like a sort of declarative verb, essentially. And that is often true. So keep it up, Stanley, and you'll lose New Year's means, don't keep it up. But if we read this in the conditional intonation, I'm going to have to sort of perform this now. It's a sing-song sound. You keep it up, Stanley, and you'll lose New Year's, right? That has the same meaning, even though now the first clause is not imperative. We could test that by subject non-optionality or pronoun second person binding. Go to bed now and you'll miss the fireworks. That's the true imperative here. You go to bed now, you'll miss the fireworks, right? So that's the declarative, not imperative. So these theories that say directive force is somehow missing are basically saying that the IAD and the declarative are the same. But that is not quite right, Keshet and I argued, because let's look at some certain types of imperatives or verbs, I should say. And some of these are only natural with a future sort of interpretation. Maybe tense here is not really the right word that I use, but more just how they're interpreted. If I said be asleep or be awake, it's natural to say be asleep by the time I get home, or be sober when your shift starts. That's normal. But it's kind of weird to say be asleep right now, right? I mean, anyone who has had little kids knows that just does not work. You can't command someone to sleep on command. So it's due to real world factors. It seems like, this is kind of odd. Be drunk or sober right now. You can't change your sort of intoxication level immediately. And these inseparable IADs share this property. Be drunk when your shift starts and you're fired. Good. Be drunk right now and you're fired. That's a little odd. Even more so with this awake example. Be awake at 3 a.m. and you'll be tired tomorrow. Good. Be awake right now and you'll be tired tomorrow. That's a little odd, I think. It's not like horribly ungrammatical, but it is a little strange. And if we compare them to their declarative and declarative conjunctions, now, interestingly, they're much more natural, I would say. Again, these have to be read with that conditional interpretation. And now what we can see is that it's actually not just general real-world properties, but actually something about the imperative itself. So because this sort of future interpretation is no longer exactly required, we're about to do a sobriety test. You're drunk right now and you're fired. I'm talking to you, you're still awake right now and you'll be tired tomorrow. So these conditional readings, they don't seem to have the same sort of awkwardness with the sort of present context. Also, imperative morphology remains in these types of constructions and other languages where it's less ambiguous with the form of the verb. So here we have Spanish, eat that and you'll die in 2 hours. Eat here is morphologically imperative. Same here with German. Go one step further and you'll fall down the stairs. The verb here, go, is in the imperative form, right? So it's unambiguously imperative. So that's another factor to consider. So what we did here, Ezra Keshet and I, we did an experiment to see if even these weird IEDs still entail directive force in English now. We predict that the inseparable IED is unnatural when no instruction can be recovered, remembering that instruction is how we're defining directive force. We got some subjects, we just constructed an experiment, and so let's take a look at what we did here. We had these 2 example items. We had a present context above, and then I forgot to label here, but the future context below. So in the present, this is what the subject saw, the present context. 2 friends are planning to go to an evening concert. One friend is picking up the other, who is constantly late. The driver calls, crucially, as she pulls up and doesn't see her friend immediately and says, you're still upstairs right now and I'm leaving without you. All right, so we predict that should be fine. All of them do, and that's one thing. Still be upstairs right now and I'm leaving without you. We predict that to be a little unnatural for the reason that you can't change your location immediately. So it's harder to get an instruction out of this in this sort of present interpretation context. But if we change this to a sort of a future type of context, the driver calls in the morning to remind her friend to be on time and says, same as this example, you're still upstairs when I pull up tonight and I'll leave without you. So instead of right now, it's just tonight now. Still be upstairs when I pull up tonight and I'll leave without you. So we predict that both of these should be fine. It's only this one, the imperative and declarative, with the right now interpretation, because it's hard to get this this instruction out of this. It's hard to get this instruction out of this when it's right now. All right, so that's what we claimed, and what we said here is that, so we did the experiments and we did find the predicted effects. So we have the IADs, the imperatives and then declaratives on the left, and the 2 declaratives on the right. And what we found is that in the present context, this is light blue to light blue, the DADs, declarative and declaratives, were rated higher than the IADs in the present context. And crucially, in the future context, so comparing now dark blue to dark blue, the IADs were better in the future than in the present, right? So the IAD, which is on the left here, in the present context, that's the one we say should be the weirdest, and that does in fact have the lowest rating. There's an interaction between the context, present, past, and the type, which is what we expected to see. So we confirm this prediction that when it's hard to get an instruction from the context, the imperative but not the declarative is a little odd, right? The effect sizes are the actual differences in the ratings is not that great because these are really complex examples. People sort of always try to want to privilege naturalness if they can, but we do see with this was 69 subjects, significant effects here. So what we can say is that, oh yeah, I'm not going to get into this, but these inseparable IIDs, if we really push them, we can find that they do have a different syntax in some cases, but see the paper for details. Interim conclusion here is that a natural imperative in English always entails directive force, under the idea that directive force is an instruction. And this appears to be true in many, many languages, such as Spanish or German, for example. We could say that it wouldn't be really very precise, but we could say that an imperative in English, Spanish, German, etc., has directive force, and that's what you do see in the literature, and we confirm that here, that's true in all of these cases. But here's the question: is directive force part of the imperative? Is it a required part of that thing? Or rather, is directive force really a property of the sentence? And that directive force is necessary to allow an imperative, right? Those are two actually quite different ideas here. So I'm going to go with door number 2, that the directive force is what allows the imperative in English. And the reason why is that I'm going to argue that not all imperatives across language have directive force. All right, so now I'm going to go on to embedded imperatives and person morphology. This is based on my dissertation in 2013 and another paper. So we have here stacking dolls to indicate imperatives, and skeletons to indicate how I felt when I was finished with my dissertation. All right, so let me continue here. Imperatives in person. Recall that first person means speaker or signer, second person means addressee, third person, everything else, he, she, it, everyone, a name, whatever it might be. Now, many, probably most languages have only second person imperatives, but there are languages with first and third person imperatives. In those languages, if it has a first or third person imperative, it's definitely going to have a second person imperative. That's what typology research tells us. But in some of these languages, there's a clear imperative set of verbs. And sometimes that set of verbs includes first and third person forms, like the ending on the verb. First person imperatives usually have a meaning of a promise, I guess. Third person imperatives are pretty hard to sort of pin down what they mean, but they're at least translated typically with a modal like should or must. So Eichenwald, who documents imperatives extensively, notes many languages that have first or third person imperatives, while also noting that it's not the common state of affairs, but still there's many examples that we could look at. One is this New Guinean language, Koban, which has a second person imperative, leave it. But it also has a third person imperative ending here. They must take the timber and go. But there's no modal verb here, actually. It's just the ending on the verb, which is a third person imperative. This other language here, Evenki, it's a Siberian language, has a full imperative paradigm, right? Like if you've ever learned a Romance language, like say Spanish, hablo, hablas, habla, etc., it has a paradigm like that for the imperative with all persons included. So first person, the verb here is find, let me find. Second person, you or just find. Third person singular, let him or her find. first person plural, inclusive, exclusive. Let us find you excluded or included. You all need to find. Let them all find. It's hard to translate these into English, of course, because English doesn't have forms like this. But that's the idea here. This language actually has this full set of forms. So when we go back and just reiterate imperatives and force again, imperative force, force, period. Force is a property of main clauses. If the main clause is a statement, the whole sentence has to be a statement, even if the embedded clause looks like a question. If the whole main clause is a question, the whole sentence has to be a question, even if the embedded clause looks like a statement. If the idea is that imperatives encode directive force, it's part of the imperative, then we've explained the lack of embedding. What should I do? Ungrammatical. I think that start your paper now. This is the task that due by tomorrow. We can't embed these imperatives, and if the imperative encodes directive force, we've explained it. However, what about languages that do allow embedding? So in my dissertation, I discussed this type of imperative. And we see this in a language like Ancient Greek, where the imperative has a very distinctive paradigm. And we can see here a second person imperative, station. This is like a general talking to some other commander. Station guards, who, third person imperative, collect the spoils. Station guards who should, must, shall collect the spoils, right? So the translation is tricky because English doesn't have a third person imperative, nor does it have an embedded imperative, but we see both of those things in this example. All right, and what I argued here is that the same languages that have first or third person imperatives are the same languages that allow. They may not have, but those are the same languages that are if a language is going to have imperative embedding, it's going to have first or third person forms. It turns out that's not actually true, which I'll get to in a second, but that's what I claimed in my dissertation. So let's take a look at some more examples here. These are also able to be embedded under non-imperatives. So here the main verb, the sort of word order is kind of backwards in this case relative to English. Let us mandate this thing. That's the last verb here. Let us mandate this. That's not an imperative actually, although it is kind of a command. To whom something is permitted. And that verb permitted is a third singular imperative. So it sort of means something like, let us determine or let us mandate who must do something and who must not, essentially. And this embedding of imperatives something that can't happen in a lot of languages like English. That's been noticed for a long time by ancient Greek scholars, but it wasn't really observed or discussed much in the linguistics literature. We can also see it's not always under commands only, though. We can see this type of embedding under non-commands. So here's a testimony from a trial. So the verb here is beg, not a command. He begged him to go to the party. All right, so this is just a recollection of what happened. Saying that drink with him and his family, meaning he must drink. So that embedded verb is an imperative. He begged him to go to the party, saying that drink, must drink, with him and his family. Or we even see within a question, do you know then which things do, meaning which things you must do? All right, we can see this also in other languages. So Koban, the New Guinea language I mentioned earlier, this is an example here where we have a conditional sentence. So the first clause is the embedded condition. The main clause is the end here, let him eat it. The first clause meaning if he will, must, should, etc., eat it, let him eat it. So Davies translates this as if he wants to eat it, he can eat it. But the two verbs, do in the embedded clause and eat in the main clause, are both imperative in form, third person imperative. And then Bhojpuri, I got this from a consultant. This is a language from India and Nepal. This language has third person imperatives. The children must come at 3 o'clock. That verb form is imperative here. Have you met David, who must come here at 3 o'clock? But there's no must in the sentence. It's just an imperative there in the embedded sentence. All right, so embedding and force. So Kaufman and Stegebeck show that imperative embeddability exists on a spectrum, sort of. And these examples that I just showed you illustrate the least restrictive form of embedding. So the conclusion from this is that imperatives actually don't entail directive force. There's something else going on here. So the question is, what is an imperative? If it doesn't entail directive force, then what is it? My answer to that question is it is actually a necessity modal. So that ending on the verb itself is a modal meaning, similar to something like should or supposed to. And notice that something like supposed to can be used as a command, like a teacher could say to the students, you're supposed to solve the question that way. But you could also use supposed to as sort of a disinterested instruction. Like I could tell my son who's doing math homework, you're supposed to solve the question this way, but I don't care if you do it that way or not, just get the answer, right? A good thing about this is that a modal analysis has already been offered for imperatives by Kaufman. And she claimed and I think this is on track here, that the directive force part of an imperative actually is sort of like a presupposition, which remember you can deny, right? So if an imperative, and she was only looking at languages like English and German, but if an imperative really has a modal component, and then the command part of it or the directive part of it is actually a type of presupposition, which entails something like authority, for example, that works great because we already know we can deny imperative presuppositions, be on time. Actually, I don't have to be, right? So that's exactly the kind of way that we deny presuppositions elsewhere in the language. So the embedding facts here support that the imperative is a modal, such that imperatives do not require directive force in all languages. There's a problem though, of course, which is that now what I've done is I've sort of predicted that you can embed an imperative in any language, but that's not true, obviously, because it's not allowed in English. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. This is sort of like a crucial part of this, but it's going to take a long time. Basically, what I'm going to do is follow Raffaele Zanotini here and say that the restriction on imperatives in English, it's not really about the imperative itself, but rather about the subject of the imperative, which remember is unique insofar as it's always sort of there, but it doesn't need to be pronounced. The subject here of the imperative, it's linked to something that linguists call case assignment, which I won't get into in depth here. But the idea is that, let me just skip this. The idea is that the imperative in, say, English, the subject of that imperative is actually licensed by or allowed to exist by the presence of directive force. Which is essentially what Zanotini was saying. And that's why the subject always has second person properties, even if it's like an inherent third person, like everything, right? So the directive force itself is the thing that's allowing the subject to exist in the imperative construction. And the imperative verb itself is kind of like an infinitive, which do not allow subjects to happen. But in languages like, say, ancient Greek, the subject is, hold on a second here. The subject is the subject in an imperative like ancient Greek. Actually, the imperative verb itself is what licenses the subject, sort of just like a normal verb, right? There's a normal subject verb agreement between the verb and the subject. So that in these languages, which I called rich agreement languages, that's actually a common term in linguistics, rich agreement here. If second person is sort of the default for an imperative, rich agreement would mean any language that has a first and or a third person imperative. If your language has that, then the subject is allowed in sort of the normal way that any other verb allows a subject. All right, and that is actually a good result because languages just do vary in terms of their morphology. For example, English has a plural, one cat, two cats, but Japanese does not have a plural marker like that, that attaches to the noun itself. Japanese has case markers that go on nouns directly. English doesn't, right? So languages are just different in terms of the types of categories that they include in their language. So we could say here that, some languages just have first or third person imperatives. There's probably some sort of functional explanation for that. But the fact is that just if we take a snapshot of the world's languages, Some have them, some don't, these first and third person imperatives. And the idea is that the ones that just happen to have those are also the ones that allow these embedded imperatives, all right? Because the sort of intuitive sense is that the imperative in the languages that have first or third person imperatives, the imperative paradigm is just like any other verb paradigm, is the idea. All right, and I'll wrap this up very quickly with imperatives in personless languages, which is what I'm working on sort of now. So let's go back to person marking. All right, so crucial for this talk, obviously. Some languages mark person on verbs. Person's always going to be present on things like pronouns. But what about person marking on verbs? Some languages mark person a lot on verbs, Spanish, Latin, Arabic, etc. Some languages have a little bit of person marking in their verbs. So spoken, not written, which has it everywhere, but spoken French or English has limited person marking. But there are other languages that have no person marking anywhere, ever, on any verb. So Japanese or Hawaiian are examples like this. These languages just don't have person marking on verbs, period. And so that sort of predicts that, contrary to what I said in my dissertation, if the imperatives in the language have no person marking at all, maybe we can get imperatives in that language because that's just the norm for all verb paradigms in that particular language. We can see that here in Hawaiian. So another route to embedding might be lack of person marking, not only in imperatives, but across all verb paradigms in that particular language. So Hawaiian, like I said, has no person marking anywhere in any verb of any type. According to Elbert and Pukui, this preverbal marker e is an imperative marker. So ehere oe, you should go. The a marks imperative. There are some independent reasons to really think that's an imperative, which is in this slide, but I won't get into that here for sake of time. But we can see that this imperatives in this language actually do go with third persons, which those grammarians Elbert and Pukui discuss how it's awkward to translate, etc. We can see here the embedded imperative that is third person itself with an imperative. So they must die at dawn. So we have imperative pono. This is kind of interesting because pono itself is usually translated as a modal verb. So it's sort of like it must be that they should die at dawn. So if we translate, if the imperative really does have a modal force, this might be something like, it must be that they should, or shall, or will, or must die at dawn. Here we have something like, I want to go. So this is a non-imperative in the main clause, and then to go. So if the imperative really has a modal meaning, we could say sort of maybe idiomatically, I want it to be that I will go, or maybe more sort of formally speaking, I want it to be the case that in all worlds under consideration, those are all worlds in which I go, which would have sort of this modal meaning to it. And we can see the sort of very free embedding, as Kaufman said, the sort of freest type of embedding is in relative clauses. We can see that here in this really long, complicated example, which I'll try to just walk you through briefly here. So the subject of the main clause is it became, I hope you can see my cursor here, it became, verb is first in this language, it became a fault of Paea that Umi would kill him. So, or this is, more like a passive really, that Umi would kill him at the time when Hawaii should have been conquered by Umi. All right, so we have imperatives in both embedded clauses. And as Elbert and Pukui note, it's basically impossible to translate these into English without this type of modal meaning. It became a fault for so-and-so when Umi would have killed him, when Umi should have been conquering Hawaii, essentially. All right, so we can see that here, this extremely just permissive embedding of the imperative form. So again, as I said earlier, subjects, again, languages with third person imperatives are just treated by the language user or the child who's learning the language as a sort of normal verb. Languages with only that second person imperative, like English, like most languages, the imperative is sort of treated more like an infinitive. It doesn't license a subject independently. For a no person marking language like Hawaiian, where person's never marked, the imperative paradigm just behaves like normal. Why? Because we just don't see person anywhere. Last final sort of complicated thing I'll say, but I think it's worth saying here. This type of thing is actually seen elsewhere in world languages. The mechanism is different. I'm not saying it's the same mechanism, but there's a similar sort of property in languages where subjects can be omitted in languages with a lot of person marking. So as is well known in Spanish, you do not need to include the subject unless you're sort of focusing the subject sort of. So if you just want to say, I have two cats, you don't need to say, yo. You can just say, tengo dos gatos, right? I have two cats. Subject is optional. In languages with no person, say Japanese, you can just say ego hanashimasu. The watashi, which is I, the pronoun, not required. It's optional. You could say it, but you don't have to. But language was with some person marking, say English, the subject is typically required. Do you know have a dog cannot mean do you know I have a dog. Subject is required. All right, so what I'm trying to say is that these kinds of restrictions on what is and isn't allowed as they're related to person marking, that's something that we actually see somewhere else in language independently. So the conclusion to all of this is that imperatives across language actually exhibit quite a lot of diversity. Much, if you take like intro to French or something, and imperatives are commands, this is how you use them. Imperatives are a lot more diverse than that, actually, both in their meaning, even within a language like French or English, but especially across languages. And they also have diversity in their form or structure. However, it is not the case that I would argue that imperative as a construct or a concept is therefore unique in each individual language that we consider. Rather, when we see these kind of radical differences, like you can or you cannot embed them, we see this language internal explanation. And for that reason, imperative as a concept can be compared across languages. Where we see difference, we see independent reasons for difference. All right, and that's it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Oh, feedback welcome. Also, yeah, feel free to email for papers, citations, etc.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really learned a lot because, as you know, I'm a historian, so this is a little out of my element, but we love to sponsor lots of different talks across academic disciplines. And so this was really, really interesting. I personally have a lot of questions, but we already have some questions in the chat as well, or in the Q&A, and I invite people to put their questions in too. But one question that I just wanted to start off with, because as I was listening to you, I was just thinking, like, what makes someone go into this area? And we have some more technical questions as well. Okay, so yeah, we'll ask those, but what makes someone go into this area and really care to this level about language? And I mean, it was so interesting to see all of those differences in sentences and how things are implied. And so how did you get into this? I'd just love to know, and I'm sure other people might want to know too. So
yeah, I mean, there's kind of I think there's two different answers. There's two different questions and therefore two different answers. One is that linguists like myself just love language. And when we see claims, like I saw, in graduate school, you can't embed an imperative. I went back and thought about my prior, language training and realized, that's not true. So for a language, someone who's just excited about language, when you see sort of strong claim, and strong claims are good, right? Because strong claims push us to find counterexamples and refine things. That's one reason. We like language. But on a more bigger picture, and there's a question in the chat like this as well, right? Why does it matter? I think that we can look at this in a couple different ways. One is that linguistics is said to be the science of language. So we use language every day, but one thing that's interesting about language is that it's largely unconscious to us. The interesting parts of language are largely not conscious to us ourselves unless we, have a language error, which of course happens quite a bit too. Just like we don't really think about what it means to walk unless we trip on our own feet, which of course does happen. We know from like scientists who build robots that walking on 2 feet is really complicated. Language is also really complicated. So I think it's worth knowing as an intellectual pursuit, how does it work? What is it? That's just like a sort of basic science question. On another level, sometimes these language questions have practical application. Things like machine, or even in this case, human translation of language, right? What is actually meant by this type of construction? But even more broadly than that, going back to the very stuff at the very beginning of language, at the very beginning of this talk, when we think about humans, right, we often think about human diversity in a lot of ways, right? There's a lot of ways that humans are diverse, both as sort of individuals and our cultures. But from a linguist perspective, of course, for every carpenter, every problem is a nail, right? But from the linguistics perspective, language diversity is one of the most interesting and surprising types of diversity that exists, right? So it is very interesting that it's not true that all humans speak or sign the same language. That's already really interesting. And then when we think about the diversity of languages that we actually see, we want to explain them, and that has led linguists and anthropologists into different sort of camps. And that's what we saw at the beginning of the talk. One camp is language is a sort of cultural product, therefore language is unpredictable, can vary infinitely. And the other view that sort of was espoused by Chomsky very strongly in the 50s and 60s is that, yes, there's a lot of superficial diversity. However, under that superficial diversity, there's a lot of regularity. And his point there was not to deny the diversity on the surface or to deny its interest, but rather to say that we're all humans. And I mean, my brother's a biologist, I think he would agree with this, that if we look at all the phenotypic differences in terms of humans, some have brown eyes, some have blue eyes, et cetera, that those differences are very small compared to the underlying universality, right? So what I try to do in this talk is take one little thing, show, yeah, it is really different actually, but if we sort of look at how it's correlated to different properties in language, really it is actually the same thing across all language, right? So that's a sort of bigger, more philosophical picture there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for explaining that. I like the analogy with biology too. I think that's I have a couple friends who are biology professors and they're always saying that, I think that was really interesting. I also was, before I asked the first question from others, I also as I was listening to you and looking at the slides, I kept thinking about how I would receive the sentences that you had on the slides, and in some cases I would receive them differently, and it seems like it's sort of, that's how people get lost in translation, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, that was very interesting to me, and I was actually thinking about how people would say those phrases to me as well.
Yeah, and that's an important point that, I mean, I didn't have time to get into, and this is an important thing. I mean, I think this is why we see in these experiments, like I showed, that it's oftentimes the effect sizes are pretty small because it's hard to get through in just text. But it is true that different contexts, of course, change the reading, and also in different languages as well. So it's well known that imperatives in English can be quite polite, actually, right? Like, oh, try a cookie, have one. But in other languages like, say, German, I spoke with a German speaker for the conditional part of the paper, and she said, yeah, I mean, these are all grammatical, but imperatives, she just commented, imperatives tend to be a little stronger in German, right? Like, we don't usually use them as much in polite context as English speakers do. Has more of a sort of schoolmarm type flavor to it. Yeah, those are sort of the conventionalized pragmatics of the construction.
Yeah, those are some of the things I was thinking about too.
Yeah.
So okay, well, I want to here's a question. Some of these are kind of technical, so I'm hoping that I understand them. The first one is the correct grammar in the case of IADs and DADs, is that how it's pronounced?
IADs and DADs, yeah.
Oh, IADs and DADs inherently linked to context intonation?
Yeah, so let me start with the dads. Maybe I can go back on the slides here. So for the dads, yes, wow, I'm not sure why it's getting blindingly white there here. For the dads, there we go. These are the ones with the square bullet points here. You keep it up, Stanley, and you lose New Year's. Yes, those definitely require that intonation. I think that's sometimes called B intonation. Anyway, there's a specific sing-songy notion you get to this. With the imperative ones, I do think that the intonation, I think that same conventional intonation is what you get. By correct grammar, I'm not sure exactly what's meant here, but there's a whole host of grammatical properties that you get in this type of inseparable IAD and DAD that you do not get in the quote unquote separable ones. So one of these, I should have put a slide in here just in case this question came up. But one is what's sometimes called backwards binding. So consider this sentence. Bribe him enough, and every senator is corruptible. Bribe him, that's a pronoun, enough, and every senator is corruptible. Every senator is looking back and referring to him, right? So that is not usually how this works. Usually we have to have, every senator is something, period. He saw himself or something, right? Where every senator comes before the him. So this type of backwards binding, bribe him enough, and every senator is corruptible. We can see that is a specific grammatical thing that we get in these conditional conjunctions in both the imperative and the declarative types. So it seems like these actually have a different syntactic structure than the separable ones. There's a few other properties that we can see that are probably a little too much to get into in just like, it's much easier to see them if they're written out. But the context determines its separable or inseparability, right? Is it sort of normal or is it sort of weird? But for all of the weird ones, there's also this special this sort of host of grammatical properties, but we only sort of see them if we sort of tinker with the examples a little bit. The inseparable ones do work a little bit differently than the separable ones. That was actually sort of more of my focus on this paper that I went through, but it's a little much for this. But if whoever's out there wants to discuss it further, I'd be happy to email or share the paper with you.
Okay, great. I have another kind of odd question. I don't know if this even makes remotely any sense. When people say, I couldn't care less.
Yes.
What they really mean is I could care less, right?
Right.
I was just wondering if that, how that plays out with the work that you do, like something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's a little unrelated here, but it comes down to sort of the conventional meanings. I mean, so in that sense, it's both unrelated, but it's also related because that's sort of like the key property of language in general.
Yeah.
Is like to what extent are meanings conventionalized, right? So we hear something like "I couldn't care less." We see it written out, and then the meaning is, clear. I could. There's no world in which I could care less. Meaning I don't care about it, right? But if we can get the meaning across with that utterance, right? I couldn't care less. Someone gets the meaning, but the utterance itself, just due to normal like speech recognition difficulties, isn't quite processed the way the original speaker is intended, right? We get this like with kids, I remember with myself as well, like kids misinterpret song lyrics, for example.
Yeah.
So if the meaning can be, the point that's interesting is that the meaning, I don't care, that could be conventionalized in two completely different ways. I couldn't care less and I could care less. I mean, they're actually, they look like complete opposites on the surface, but with the right sort of, input to the child learner, they can actually have the same meaning, right? And the point here is that language meanings are conventionalized. That goes back to the part about Saussure, right? So like every sort of word or even phrase meaning in a way is idiomatic, right? And that's what gets so hard to sort of disentangle the meaning components from the grammatical components, which is sort of what I focused on in this talk.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Here's
Mhm.
another one. Couldn't you also ignore directive force? Why would an imperative not still be an order or a command?
Well, so couldn't you also ignore the force? So yeah, this gets to the relationship between the speaker signer, the first person, and the addressee, the second person, right? So when the the idea here is that in English imperative, you have to have directive force to allow it to stand alone grammatically. So I can't say something like be on time or read that book. I actually, or even something that's a little weaker, but still an imperative, like if you want to get to LA, try flying to Burbank. The idea here is that cannot be grammatical for me unless directive force is there to allow the sentence, the subject to stand. The subject, the grammatical subject, which in this case is the addressee. Now, the person on the receiving end of that imperative, they're definitely allowed to ignore that directive force and or deny it, right? They don't need to obey, right, the speaker or the signer. They can just brush it off, right? But for the there's yeah, this gets again to the sort of two different sides of this coin, the meaning and the form, right? So the form of the imperative actually requires for the speaker this meaning element, which is directive force, but the addressee, they're welcome to not comply. But the argument here is that the directive force is required for the imperative to be uttered or signed by the speaker. I'm not sure. I hope that answers the question, but yeah. But you can always deny the command if you so choose. Yeah, or like I said, you can deny what the command presupposes, right? So that's a very common thing with like consider your typical 2 or 3-year-old, right? Like who's commanding their parents, right? And the parent just, they don't have to what they might do in response, they might just not even just ignore it, but they might directly deny the presupposition, right? So Magda Kaufman says that the directive force really is a presupposition. It presupposes authority and some other things. So if that 3-year-old is commanding the parent can just deny the presupposition. Actually, son, you can't tell me what to do, right? Because I'm the parent, you're the child, right? That's sort of a typical type of interaction. So yeah, the directive force under this analysis just presupposes a host of things, one of which is authority or knowledge or some other things, and so you can definitely deny the presupposition as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Here's another one. How does intonation affect imperatives in other languages? Is it similar to how it's singy-songy in English?
So unfortunately, I'm going to have to punt on this and say I really have no idea. Yeah, I mean, intonation is a pretty important aspect of English, as it is in many languages. But I couldn't tell you if that sing-song intonation is required across spoken languages in these types of conditional conjunction structures. All I can do is non-answer the question by telling you some other interesting things about English, which is that this same sing-song intonation actually cuts across a lot of constructions that even don't involve verbs in the first conjunct. For example, like the bouncer at the bar, you're drinking beers and the bouncer says, one more and you're out of here, right? Or the manager says to the pitcher, one more wild pitch and you're going to the showers, right? So you don't even need a verb in the first sentence. Something about this, right, there's a lot of cases in English where you can do the same work with a grammatical construction or the intonation, indicating that the intonation sort of is part of the grammar. I would definitely say that's true. So, you can ask a question, what did you buy? Or you can say, you bought what? With that rivaling intonation. Either way is fine. So it seems like you can have an if conditional. If you drink one more, then I'll throw you out of the bar. Or you could say, one more drink and you're out, right? With the sing-song intonation. But whether it's cross-linguistic, I'm sorry, I can't answer.
Okay, good. And that's always a good thing, especially for students who might be participating in this, that if you don't know the answer, just say you don't know it, right? So
And then deflect with something you do know.
yes, and come up with something you do know. So the I did want to come back to to one of the questions, which was, you had alluded to it earlier, about how does this play out in the real world? And can you just talk a bit more about that? Just really interested in like, even if it's like how you explain what you do to people, or how does this play out? Because I can see it playing out in a whole variety of areas, from when I'm listening to music to when I'm in experiencing different cultures, traveling, listening to children. I mean, it just seems like there's so many ways, but I'm not even, because it's not my area of expertise, I'm not sure exactly how that happens. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways you could go with it. Right. One is sort of this concept of sort of cultural competence, right? So it's I think this is a commonplace thing for people when they start to not only learn other languages, but also sort of inhabit the communities where those languages are used. So whether it's going to a foreign country, or say learning American Sign Language and then being in a group of people who use American Sign Language, the language and the culture, right? It's your experience with one, and then the other, the culture part of it. You start to realize that, right, languages have these different ways of encoding things, right? And what I've tried to do here is to say that when we have these differences in languages, it's not just random, but there's other things at play. But I think that sort of, if we take that sort of second, that second part is like the linguistic science part of it that I really care about in this kind of research. But the first part of it is of course also crucial. We have to understand that at least on the superficial level, right, languages are different. And what we think we might know about language um, is often, unless we have that more deeper experience, it's often very much informed by our own, individual experience, right? So the more you start to look at these different types of languages, and how they differ, right? And then also, like what I said with like the German, versus the English imperative context of use, you realize that how to use these different things is really sort of a big part of culture. This is why I sort of jokingly tell my students, I don't teach languages, but it often comes up, obviously, right? I tell my students, never ever swear in a language you don't know natively, because it's always going to sound bad, right? Like, don't think that you've learned the language well enough that you can start swearing in it, because it's almost assuredly going to sound bad. Because like these swear words, right? The context that we can use them is so specific, even though we don't realize it. Which leads me to the second part, the not realizing it part. There also is, the other thing that linguists really care about, myself included, this is what really drove Chomsky back in the 50s and 60s, is, how does anyone learn this stuff? When you see like a 3-year-old, I mean, watch a 3 or 4-year-old try to drink a beverage with a straw. They'll do this every single time, right? Because it's not clear to them that the fluid's on the bottom and you need to have the cup, gravity's got to pull that liquid down. So what we can conclude from this is that kids, their sort of ability to logically inference about the world is fairly minimal. But when we look at the complexity of language and language data, it's so much more complicated than we realize, right? It's this extremely complicated machine that we're using constantly. And how do kids get to the point where they achieve the same, I don't want to say same, but a similar competence as their adult caregivers, right? And I mean, and this actually drives home this point a little bit, is that they're building the language based on the data. It's not the case that the caregiver is just putting the language in their head. And that's why we get, slow language change over time. But at the same time, we have to appreciate how complex the actual object, in this case, language, how complex it is for children to be learning these things, right? Like parents often think that they're teaching their child, like, oh, this is a dog, that's a cow, what sound does a snake make? Those are all awesome things to do with kids. But the true complexity of language are things that that we don't notice until we study them, right? So that's I think that's a really important real world part for me as well. The learnability of these types of things.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to ask you to go all the way to the end of your PowerPoint, just so that everyone can have your information.
Right.
And just wanted to say thank you so much. This was really terrific. I feel like I learned a lot, and you made me think a lot too. So and I want to say thank you to Natalie for doing tech, and thank you to our audience. We will be sending a recording of this webinar to everyone. And we are really, really grateful to the Mellon Foundation for sponsoring these kinds of talks. So thank you so much, David. This was great.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. And thank you again to the tech team and everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. Take good care, everybody. Bye.